Hello, everybody. How are you all doing? And welcome to this session. My name is Kris Odland. I am the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and I'm your moderator today for this panel discussion. And it's an important one. We're going to be looking at, as we all know, probably the greatest impact that's hit our industry ever, as well as society across the globe, has been the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet with every great challenge, there are also often great opportunities. Personally, I've been very fortunate to work with a number of companies throughout the pandemic across all corners of the globe, from the APAC region. Here in EMEA, I'm based in London, as well as across the other side of the Atlantic in America. And I've seen companies show true innovation and ingenuity. I've seen companies show great temerity and tenacity, and we've seen companies pivot on a dime, to use the American phrase, but we've also seen companies become that much closer to their customers and that much closer to their engineers. So today's session is going to be looking at some of those challenges, taking different viewpoints from our panelists and understanding how their organizations have adapted, but also looking at some of the other side of this, how they've grown their businesses, how they've developed their businesses, how they've got closer to those customers. So that's the focus of the session for the next hour. First and foremost, of course, I'd like to introduce my panelists. However, I am going to do it the lazy way, because I always find that panelists introduce themselves ever so much better than I do. So I will go around clockwise from my vision. You may be seeing something slightly different, as is the way with these Zoom panels. But Anila, perhaps you could introduce yourself first, and then we'll go to Danny and Jan, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So Anila, over to you.
Thank you, Kris. Hello, everyone. Hi from Singapore. So my name's Anila Fredericks. I work for Telstra and run the international service operations. My team is predominantly based in KL, but we have satellite teams in the UK, in Hong Kong, as well as in Singapore. It's a pleasure to be here and to discuss some of our learnings, and I'm sure you'll get lots out of it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, hi, I'm Danny Levy. I'm the Managing Director of Worldwide Business Research, also based in Singapore. So what do we do? You probably know us from organising field service. So we organise field service. We've been doing it as a global conference and exhibition since 2002. It takes place in the US in Palm Springs. It takes place on the East Coast as well. We've got an edition in Europe that's moved around. It's been in Amsterdam and Barcelona. We've been organising it out here in Singapore and Asia for the last 4 years. The company, first and foremost, is a large-scale physical events business. In recent times, we've transitioned very, very fast to being a virtual media company business, even quicker than before. And we're doing things now that we were talking about a few months ago. Everything's been accelerated. So I'm sure we'll get into that later in the panel. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks, Kris.
Thanks, Danny. Jan, if you just take one moment to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Jan van Veen. I'm the founder and the managing director of More Momentum, and we are a advisory and community company helping manufacturing companies to accelerate their business innovation, which is predominantly around service innovation and digital solutions innovation. And we do that through community meetings, exchanging best practices, and also doing research to capture the best practices. And in this situation, at this moment with COVID-19, also the emerging best practices. And that's also why we're doing this research project with Field Service Asia together and Field Service News, with a survey to have a better understanding what are the concerns and challenges and strategies at this moment. So.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, and so the idea that we're here to kind of talk around, if I remember, if we've got the innovation out, how do we innovate out of crisis is a key kind of theme that's coming across around the conversation. I think, Danny, is probably the best point to start, because you touched on this very loosely, as you said, but your organization is probably the best. I mean, we know you from Field Service News as the hosts of Field Service Asia. I also know your business as well, and you were a physical events company, what, 4 or 5 months ago. that's had to have been some hard work to adapt. Let's not kind of under-egg the pudding here. But you've shown some great innovation. So perhaps we can start at that point and talk about innovation. And I know, Anila, as well, there's been some great kind of developments on your end. So let's kind of lead that way around first. But Danny, if I could speak to you first about how you guys have had to have adapted.
Yeah, sure, Chris. So, I mean, I can speak more from the Asian perspective, but I mean, globally, you know, like I said before, first and foremost, the bulk of our revenue was coming through large-scale physical in-person events. And I think any industry that's touched by COVID that had an in-person, person-to-person business model has really found the last 3 to 4 or 5 months extremely challenging. Obviously, that goes for service as well, which we'll get into later, which is very people-driven. But for us, we had to pivot very, very fast. You know, it became apparent, I think, globally, that it was a global issue back in March, but we had it as an Asian issue from January onwards. I think the first cases from Wuhan were found in Singapore in January, and it was just very apparent that we were going to have to postpone events. We were going to have to put in additional checks, temperature screenings. We were going to have to get people wearing masks, look at social distancing. All of that's very hard and very challenging when you're relying on a business model that you're looking to bring people together in in-person interactive formats, and you're not really thinking, you know, that people would have to be 1 meter or 2 meters apart from each other. Yeah. That's a lot of waving when you're at an event, if you're having to do that, which isn't ideal. So I think for us, you know, we were fortunate because Worldwide Business Research, we did have already an insights digital business arm channel that was already active. So we were organizing virtual summits, we were organizing one-to-one meetings over Zoom, over platforms like On24, but it was just the speed in which we had to transition and change everything from the physical environment into the digital environment was quite challenging. And the big thing for me, I mean, you've got all these fancy platforms and technology that you need to use, but the big thing, if you're going to do it well, is the people. It's all about the people internally. They've got to A, really want to do it, and B, also they've got to have that adaptability. They've got to thrive in ambiguity if they're going to make a success out of it. And I think for you as a leader, you have to really simplify everything, because I think a lot of the time we can talk through all these new concepts, new ideas, new projects, and if we overcomplicate it for our internal and external customers, it's going to be very confusing, right? I mean, they were happy with how things were being done before. So I think as a leader, you've really got to simplify. You've really got to hone in on the one thing you want your internal team to understand, and be able to deliver on that day, that week, and be able to be honest enough and to love yourself enough to hold your hands up and say, actually, we need to pivot again 3 or 4 days later. I didn't have all the answers, but we're going to change again and move forward again. So I just think that that's the key thing, right? You've got to be able to be adaptable, but you've got to be honest enough to hold your hand up when you got it wrong to your team, so that they know, okay, this guy doesn't have all the answers, or lady, but you know, we're in it together, we're in the trenches together, and we're going to get there together. So I think that's been the big thing I've noticed. It's not about buying the most expensive technology or having the best technology available to you if you haven't got the team and the people that are going to make it a reality.
Yeah. No, I've seen echoes of that in multiple conversations, and it's. I think there's an honesty that's something that one of the things that's really translating across in a number of conversations I have that's been echoed there, Dan. It's that honesty to say, look, we are in this together. We've got this collegiate approach, and we're not going to get everything right first time. You know, actually, our customers perhaps don't expect us to get everything right first time. They expect us to be reactive. They expect us to be there. They expect us to do what we can. Anila, this sounds quite familiar to the last conversation we were having as well. And I noticed you were nodding your head, especially when Danny was talking about people along that. Perhaps you can speak a little bit to how the pandemic and the lockdowns kind of impacted your organization first and foremost, and then kind of speak to that point as well.
Sure thing. Danny, something that you said absolutely resonated with me. You know, as we moved from February through to March, it was seen as an Asian problem rather than a global pandemic, right? I remember my team in Australia and globally, we were supposed to meet in Perth for our annual offsite. And my colleague, Vicky, who's in Hong Kong, and I were sort of saying, hey, we're not going to come because, you know, there was this bit of social stigma attached to coming in from an Asian country and bringing the virus along. So I still remember, you know, Vicky and I saying, no, I think we'll opt out. We won't go. And of course, a week later, no one could go. You know, it hit everyone. So, you know, I think that was sort of a changing piece of conversation where Australia and some other countries were thinking, oh, it's not going to impact us. It's an Asian problem, right? So very soon, very quickly, people had to adapt and innovate and come to the party, literally, right? So, coming back to people, like, even though we've been on a digital transformation roadmap, we've tried to make the operations more digital and, you know, all of that. I think the real test was when we had to go into BCP within like 24 hours. And I think, although we've tested our BCP a number of times, you know, when it actually happens, that's when you really test. And of course, you can't do that without your people. So I remember, Malaysia organized, announced the MCO, and within 48 hours, you had to go from being, working in the office to work from home. And we have about 100 staff in Malaysia. And I remember my leaders in Malaysia spending the whole night in the office, just getting the comms together, making sure that people's safety was considered first, making sure all the different shifts, we have 3 different shifts operating, they were all, advised. And within 24 hours, we managed to, not let the next shift come in and make sure everyone takes their laptops home, and then of course, get IT involved and make sure it was all tested. So all this happened within 24 hours. And again, like you said, Danny, you very quickly realize, like, I'm based in Singapore, some of our other leaders are based in Australia and in Hong Kong. And unless you have people working together as a team doing their bit, you just can't do it. But, I think it's a real coming together of not just, your preparation and all of the technology that sits behind it, but also a keen willingness to participate and roll your sleeves and say, hey, we're in this together.
Yeah. I think, and actually, do you know what? I'm gonna rather than give my thought that was in my head, I'm gonna put it to Jan as a question instead, because I'm the moderator today. I keep forgetting. But Jan, one of the things I was thinking there is it's fascinating because from a political perspective, there have been every country and very different regions who have reacted differently. Yet from a business perspective, I'm hearing the same stories when I do these sessions in APAC as I am in EMEA in Europe as I am in America, in the sense that there are fundamental core threads of what good leadership looks like. Now, I know you also have worked with companies from different pockets of the world, so I'm just curious to see if that's, to bring that global perspective in here as well. What I'm hearing from Danny, from Anila, from other people that I've worked with in the APAC region, again, it's exactly echoed across, isn't it? When we look at what makes an organization have that adaptability, I don't know if that's a good word really, but I think there's, as somebody that's paid to write, I should think of better words, but adaptability is the one that's there for me. What is it, Jan? Because you work with so many companies. What is it that is that core common thread that's in that DNA that allows companies, that allows leaders like Danny and Anila to be able to kind of see these adaptations, see this agility? I mean, is there a secret sauce that you've stumbled across? Because I know you're talking to so many companies.
It's interesting because in the end, these months, last half year, is very rare situation where there's so clear crisis, threat, issue going on that it makes sense for every individual and organization. We have to adapt. It's not a choice. So an interesting thing that you see now is that every organization and every individual in an organization understands it, and in that sense also is, let's say, willing to drive the change and adapt. On the other hand, we do see some differences between one organization and the other, or one department or region in an organization compared to the other, where, let's say, the flexibility, the engagement of the people was at a higher level, that they have less issues in adapting than those where there were some engagement issues anyway, or that there was a leadership issue anyway. There you see that individuals, team members in the organization, start raising different questions, more concerns, have more doubt about the leadership, if we're doing the right thing, etc. Therefore, also resist against some solutions. As an interesting example, somebody mentioned that they saw that at some point field service agents that we were having kind of ongoing social conversations through the social media and WhatsApp, where it was a kind of battle who would have the most devastating story, which is just bringing the mindset down instead of up. And that is, in the end, an issue which is not caused by the COVID, but it kind of exposes a leadership and engagement issue the organization was having anyway. So in that sense, I don't think there's any magic at this moment. It's a very special situation. It's clear we have to change and adapt. And that's also why you see many organizations, whether it's healthcare providers, manufacturers or governments, they are shifting so quickly. And that only happens because of these huge armies of employees who are on the same page and making it happen. So I'm not quite sure if that's kind of the answer to your question.
To be honest, it was a bit of a curveball. I don't think that I did ask you for the magic source of what makes service great and how we adapt our process. So I think any answer was a great answer, Jan. So thank you. And you know, one point that I'd like to kind of come back to on that, which kind of was echoed a little bit in what Jan was saying there. That for my mind, there's been two big conversations that had to have happened. For any organization throughout this process. And also, as we start talking about innovation and moving out of and moving towards recovery, I think these are the two conversations that are underpinning it continuously. That is a conversation with our staff and particularly our engineers, and also a conversation with our customers. I'd just like to take a moment just to kind of reflect back on how you tackle those, and which this may be, again, this may be one of those questions that's almost impossible to answer, but which was the conversation you tackle first? Do you speak to the customers first when everything's locking down, or do you get the team right so you're set, and then you can say, okay, now Mr. Customer, we've got this is everything we've done. How did you guys approach it?
It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. I'm full of awkward conversations and questions this morning.
Yeah.
Morning for me anyway. So.
Yeah, so the reality is that we exist to serve our customers, right? So at the end of the day, if the customers aren't there, if they don't need us, then, you know, we don't need to exist, basically. So it's really ensuring that from a customer perspective, they knew how to contact us. So if there was any change in the way they approached us, they knew upfront, right? So for example, some of our data centers, the process has changed. So we made sure that even prior to us moving to BCP, we informed our customers and said, hey, everything is business as usual, but these are the steps you need to take. And it's specific to countries as well, right? So for example, if you're at the London hosting center, it's a little bit different. If you're in Singapore Pilot Bar, it's a little bit different. So we had to make sure all those comms went out. So that was done already. But I think it's also, you know, the primary care factor for us was our people, the safety of our people, right? And so again, you know, we'd innovated in doing our HR, you know, portal up and making sure that all of those system checks, like the ergonomic checks, etc., were on the portal, but we hadn't actually exercised it. We'd done the checks at the office, but not in the home environment. So very quickly, we were able to modify that to make sure that our people were covered for, like, you know, everyone was accounted for, and they all did ergonomic checks, so their safety at home was good. Tools of trade was the other one. We very quickly realized that whilst we could work from home, the experience using a laptop was very different, you know, to having 3 or 4 different screens at work. Plus the data connectivity. Some of them, you know, we have very good data connectivity in the office, but not so at home. Some of them were using their mobile devices. So we very quickly had to mobilize tools of trade for them. So And I think the other aspect of it was really trusting our people and empowering them to deliver, right? There was no big brother effect where we were saying, hey, you're working from home, but we're going to check on you. We do have daily stand-up. So we have a morning 10 a.m. stand-up and a 6 p.m. stand-up where the leaders come together and share the information. But however, there was no, oh, we're going to monitor you on Teams. You need to be, active, or you need to be visible, etc. Right? And I think that made a huge difference, because what we were seeing is some contact centers were operating like that, whereas for us it was about really trusting everyone to deliver and working with each other. So I think the care factor for our people then translated into care for our customers as well, right? And that really helped. And also, really checking in. For example, I've done about 60 skit meetings with my people. So usually I'm in KL every month, a couple of times every month. And so I get to meet with the people, whereas post-February, we don't have any travel authorized, but I'm catching up with them every day. And it's almost like having a random coffee with them in their homes. So it makes a big difference when you really care. And you really, when you look at the situation, not everyone's, and some wise person said that we're in the same storm, but are on different boats, right? So everyone's situation is so different. Some of my staff have 4, 5, 6 kids, right? And they have the spouse working from home as well. And it's this whole separation of, okay, who's going to do what? Which room are they going to be located in, and who's going to have the kids when I have a meeting? So I think it's massive sacrifices from, people as well, right? And I think that's what companies have started to realize, that we can't do it unless there's empowerment and there is a willingness to share and be part of that journey, right?
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because the words that keep coming out that have the most resonance are some of the most fundamental kind of core words. Almost, if we were to collectively write a group mission statement right now of what the words are, it's all the words that we actually would see. And we touched on honesty at the beginning with Danny. The word that comes out for me from there is trust. And again, it's something that I've seen in a number of areas. I've seen a lot, especially in the field service realm, the kind of decentralization of authority and giving autonomy to the engineers to be able to make decisions on the cuff and know that they've got the support there as well. I think, Danny, one thing to bring into this point as well, though, and this is to speak to Anila's point, is, she mentioned that we're all inviting each other into our rooms. I've said this on a couple of different streams, in the sense it's like, I'm here in my little back room, and it's the room I have in the house, which is why it's got all my guitars. But actually, this was said to me by a good friend of mine, Jed Cranny, who's the European Service Director for Konica Minolta. He said, I'm able to step into, my engineers' lives. I'm able to understand them a little bit more. I'm able to emphasize. I think one of the most important things that I've seen is the conversation has to be two-way, as organizations. And I think, Danny, your perspective on this would be really interesting, because obviously you specialize in communication anyway, so externally and internally. But I think it's been about that dynamic of making sure people can speak back to us as leaders, as well as, the broadcast announcements. Sounds like what Anila's referring to with all of I love that way of phrasing it, dropping in for a quick random coffee in their house. It's quite a nice way of phrasing it. Danny, what's your thoughts around that? How communication had to adapt, and what you've seen in terms of good communication, both from the WBR perspective, but also, again, you've got so many touch points with different companies.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Just back to Anila's point as well, I think you were asking before around customers. Do you need to look after your customers or your people first? Yeah. I think we often make the mistake of thinking, oh, if we're happy in work, if we enjoy what we're doing, we're going to be happy in life. If we're succeeding and doing well. But I often think it's the other way around. If you're happy in life, you're happy in your personal life, your family's world, whatever it is, you're much more then likely to bring that into the workplace. So I think through this pandemic, you've got to put your people first and really be checking in with them very, very regularly to make sure everything is okay. You've got to be speaking to them very regularly just to understand where their head is at, because You know, we all used to talk about working from home. Wouldn't it be great to work from home? But then all the challenges that would go along with that before the pandemic. But we've all been forced to work from home in a really extraordinary situation that's mentally very, very tough on people. You know, especially as Anila pointed out, if you've got children walking around. In Singapore, you know, space is quite a premium. So most people are in apartments here, you know, 2-3 bedroom apartment if you're lucky. So you're really giving up on that space thing. So yeah, if your team isn't happy, if they're not motivated, if you as a leader are not there for them, you honestly have to be there for them. Not just say, oh, if you need anything, I'm here, and then you just check out for the week. You know, doing little things like making time available for the team to log into Zoom and having an hour together as you as a leader, you also log in and you just have that collaboration for an hour where maybe you're not even working on the same thing, but you can just chat to each other for an hour, talk about what you're going through. I often think that one thing we've really lost through all of this and working from home are those kind of digital or physical water cooler moments where you just catch up with someone from the office for 10-15 minutes while you were getting a water, while you were going down to get a coffee. You'd have those 10-15 minutes of walking to the meeting room, which we've completely lost now because you get off one Zoom call and you get onto the next Zoom call and you just feel exhausted. I mean, in the beginning, I felt exhausted at the end of the day because you've got people looking into your home, right? And you have to be more engaged than you would have to be in person so that people can see that you're really animated and you care. So I think, you know, communication, Kris, was always important, right? As leaders, I mean, it was always mega important. If you couldn't communicate effectively and you didn't have a clear vision, you're not going to lead effectively, are you? But I think at the moment, it's been even more brought to the fore. And I think it's really weeded out the bad leaders. I think, you know, if you were not a good, effective, strong leader before this happened, you know, things are tough, things are challenging, things are different, you know, it's not going to bring your strengths to the fore. So yeah, my advice really is just listen to your team, speak a lot less than they do, and honestly care about them. You have to honestly care about them and what they're saying, and make yourself available whenever they need you, for whatever it is, to be available, right? I mean, there's a lot of stresses, there's a lot of new technologies, a lot of new ways of working. This is very intimidating for a lot of people. But there's no reason it has to be intimidating. You can humanize a lot of this stuff and make it very easy, but you've got to be there for your team. If your team isn't happy, if your team isn't functioning to a high level, you're not going to have any customers.
Yeah, very well said.
I would like to add 2 things, by the way, to this, because I think this is quite important in these times. So in general, we know engagement is important. We need to have 2-way communication. But there are 2 things quite special in these times. Is first of all, we have a lot of engineers and people who are used to be paid, let's say, their job is to know when they talk with their clients. And now there are situations that they don't know and they cannot know because it's completely new. So they have to have a message. It's okay not to know. So find out the best solution possible given the circumstances, and maybe have a co-creative approach with your clients with that, and also engage your clients in that kind of conversation. So they have to be empowered for that. Maybe you have to educate them a bit or train them a bit or guide them a bit in that. But first of all, make sure that that is clear, that we know that this is a situation, and empower them in that. And the other thing, which I think is also interesting, if you talk about engagement, you know, the Maslow pyramid. So typically we used to be in, let's say, the top part of that pyramid. And what I learned from a lot of service leaders recently is those topics, they do not engage anymore, because now the concerns are 1 or 2 steps down into, let's say, safety, security of your health and your body and your family. So you can do all kind of self-realization things, but that doesn't matter if the family are not safe. So address that first. So if we have these one-to-one conversations or whatsoever, it should be about those kind of topics probably, and open up the conversation in that and see what your employees are concerned about. Even though you may not have the answer to it, but at least make sure it's listened, heard of, and that we are working on it, something like that.
let's. I think that's a really nice segue, actually, Jan, because I think those are a couple of really interesting points, and it is this shift in conversation we're having, and I think perhaps that's a nice segue to the next part of this conversation, in that we're seeing business models evolve. We touched on this with conversation with Danny at the beginning as well. We're seeing, I mean, being in Britain at being morning, the first thing that comes into my mind is JCB and Dyson. That's a partnership nobody on earth could have predicted that at some point mid 2020, a company that are famous for making Hoovers and a company that are famous for making earth movers would suddenly find a cohesion and come together and make a completely different product. Yet they did, and we saw innovation. We've seen companies go in directions we never thought of, and I think all of us now need to be thinking of this as service leaders, as business leaders. We need to be thinking about what does the future offer for us, and that doesn't necessarily mean a complete 360 in terms of the product offering that we're making. Of course, most of these 360s are temporary, like the various organizations, Koenig and Bauer, for example, now making face masks in Germany. They've been printers for God knows how many years, 200 years, and suddenly they're doing that. But that's temporary. But what I think is interesting is how we approach the change in service design. How do we approach the change in what the service conversation looks like with our customers? I think there are a number of big factors here that we should be considering. I think the fact that we probably are, and even though I am a glass half full kind of chap, I think the reality is we're going to see an economic downturn across at least a significant period, maybe 18, 24 months, maybe longer. I'm backing what one of my American friends called the Nike swoosh bounce back. Rather than it being a V or a bathtub, the Nike swoosh I think works well as we gradually pick it back up. But people are going to be short for cash. Organizations are going to be short for cash. There's less cash flow in the market. That means that there's going to be more importance on assets, on maintenance contracts. We may see different evolving ways for service contracts. We may see more of a shift, and I think this may happen to the everything as a service idea. In 2008, when we saw the global downturn economically, we saw SaaS really take root, and I think that we may start to see that mirrored across a number of different ways. So I do think there's a conversation to be had around the service, rethinking some of our service contracts, etc. So I'd be really keen to kind of get your thoughts on that, guys. And Neil, perhaps if I can start with yourself in terms of how the organizations had to think about some of these conundrums, because we are entering people keep saying it's the new normal. I think a better phrase is the next normal.
Yeah.
And we've got to rethink how service looks in this next normal. So yeah, that was a long preamble, but I'll let you answer.
No, lots of things to think about, Kris, especially as we move back. So I think as we eased into, or for some of us, suddenly into, the situation of working from home and doing everything remote, now it's about how do we taper and move back into, some form of normalcy. And I think, again, caution and working with your people. So if I look at it from the lens of people, process, technology, from a people perspective, organizations are going to be challenged with different questions, right? Previously, it was, okay, we're based in KL. I'm in the process of renewing our facility for the next 3 years. So the question is, do I need those premises, or do I need a smaller office maybe? Now that we've proven that we can work from home, right? Like if you looked at it 6 months ago, and if someone said, hey, can I work from home? The standard answer from my team managers would be, hey, we're a contact center. We need to be here together as a group. We've challenged all of that, right? I had a couple of staff stuck in Pakistan, one in New Zealand. They worked from there, or, so now the question will be, why can't you? I can work from there. So, but obviously now it's legal and tax ramifications and all of that. So from a people perspective, it's really, about being open and transparent about what the possibilities are and what you can work with as an organization. So the whole service support model structure needs to be challenged and questioned, outsourced versus in-source models. where do you put your staff? Do they all work from home, or I know that a lot of people are eager to come, not a lot, but there is a significant number of people who want to come back to work because they miss the water cooler conversations, right? They miss the camaraderie of being together as a team and all of that. So I think it's that whole balance. So, some of the things we've done is, okay, we start moving back into the office 15th of July, but then we've got a list of people who'd like to work from the office rather than from home. So we prioritize them. Then we look at people at risk. Can we afford to let them come into the office because, safety first. So all of those considerations from a people perspective, but also as technology advances and we're doing more stuff, online and innovating, it's about how do we train them? How do we make sure that, they're fit for purpose for this new normal, right, that we're working towards? From a process perspective, again, all the boundaries and borders went out the door, right?
Yeah.
Things that we could do physically, we now do remotely, like for our field technicians or, for our networks. What we're investing now is self-healing networks that can come together by itself rather than having someone go out there and fix things, right? How do we proactively monitor and maintain the network without the need of being there physically, for example? So that's something that we need to look at. And I think this has challenged the status quo like nothing else would. Like one of the things was trying to get our online portal uptake up, right? So we absolutely struggled with it. And there was a lot of pushback from the internal team saying, hey, that's our jobs going out the door because, you're asking them to go digital and customers are going to go online. But then you're forced into a new normal where everything is online. What we saw was the digital uptake just went over the roof, but now it's about providing quality and value to the customers through those channels and continuing to evolve and improve. And of course, the technology, as I said, we need to look at what are the network changes. And today I was in a meeting where we're looking at the plans for the coming year, and it's all the digitization plans, right? And the things that we're talking about is how do we do, testing remotely? A truck roll is expensive. But then it's required in certain cases. So, we need to reserve it for those instances where we need to do that. But then how do we digitize and evolve and innovate to make sure that think about it from a customer perspective. Things that would take 2 days to resolve could be resolved in 30 minutes, right? So I think the advantages are there, but it's more about the value add. And now that some of those layers have been peeled off, I think there's no hiding, right? And saying, hey, no, this won't work. There's no territorial, I need my team. And, it's really challenged the status quo.
It has. And this is a conversation I've been having quite a lot. It's really interesting because there's no reason, as you say, Anila, there's no reason why we can't go remote first as a default. It's more cost effective for us as an organization. It's more effective for our clients quite often, in the sense that, like you say, they're back up and running in a lot less time if we can solve remote first. One of the challenges, and perhaps Jan, I'll get your thoughts on this. One of the challenges is that we lose the, I still haven't quite got a better way of phrasing this, but we lose the theatre to a degree of the service engineer arriving on site to fix a problem. The engineer arrives on site when something's down and they park their van at the front of right at the premium parking spot with a nice logo on, and they come in, they may as well have a cape flying out the back of them because they come in, they solve all the problems, and there's a very visible, evident value of that and that service. When somebody's doing that service and they're dialing in, they may not even be on the phone. They're just dialing in and accessing an asset remotely, and it's more of a software base. There's a challenge in perhaps convincing the customer where the value lies there. That's one worry that I've heard echoed. Jan, have you heard that? Do you find that with the community that you serve? Yeah. And then Danny, I'd also like to get your thoughts on that as well, because obviously that echoes very much into the shift from a physical event to a digital event. And I'd be keen to see all of the opinion on that. So if we start with Jan, then maybe Danny, then come back to Anila. That'd be great on that point of, are we losing something if we lose that kind of that face-to-face interaction? Because I'm worried we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, basically, is what I'm getting.
I don't think it's a reason to be worried, by the way, Chris. I don't think we're losing something. I think we're getting something better for it. But let's face it, indeed, it is an issue, particularly for those field service organizations who do not have a very clear value proposition other than we will do the maintenance, we will come on site if needed, which is basically we pay for the effort. If that is the kind of value proposition, then you want to see that you're paying for something that is being delivered. That means being tangibly on site. So in those kind of models, that is for sure a challenge. On the other hand, those companies already have moved forward to say, hey, but we have a very clear value drivers. So we ensure certain uptime or availability, or we ensure certain performance of your operations, not only looking at the uptime of the machine or instrument, but also in the entire process and your people, for example. There it's a different story, because there their clients are paying for an outcome or a value instead of physical visits from engineers. So I think that is where the challenge is for some companies indeed. So I do hear this, but I also hear quite a few who are not having that issue. And let's face it, any kind of company who has a kind of more remote business model, like you just mentioned, software as a service or those kind of services, or maybe even with you in the Telstra, where actually your service is something which is just going through a piece of wire or something like that. That is not in that sense tangent. What is the kind of service you're getting, and they have different models in place. At some point, it's kind of customer success approach, where you have other kind of customer contact to talk about the issues, the performance improvements, the value they're getting, what will be the next step, something like that. And so it's account management or customer success approach. You can think about certain weekly or monthly reports where you say, hey, these are the incidents, this is how we resolved it, and this is the value of it. So those kind of practices need to be put in place. On top of that, I think that the whole service business is going to shift from an effort-based maintenance to more kind of performance-based and process optimization. And in that shift, this is not going to be an issue in itself. That is part of the model.
Okay, thank you. And Danny, before I get your thoughts on that, I just want to say to everybody listening as well, as we kind of approach the last quarter of an hour of the session, there is a Q&A panel within the Zoom. It's at the bottom. Again, you may have a slightly different setup. I know we all have slightly different setups depending on our own preferences. For me, it's at the bottom. It's next to the all of the options there. You can see there's a Q&A tab. I've got the Q&A open. So anyone that's got questions that come in, do pop them in, and I'll go through those as well in towards the latter part of the session. So sorry, Danny, just to interrupt you. I thought I'd interrupt you prior rather than mid-flow. Always the best route. But I mean, to this same point, is there something that we're going to miss? And you know, I'm saying this as it's a finality, but the reason is I know live events will come back. I know live service calls will come back. I know there will be restrictions in you know, the social distancing, and we will get back to some form of normalcy, as Anila puts it. However, I think once the kind of the window shifts a little bit, especially in terms of strategies and technologies, it's sometimes hard to walk that back. So I think we will become much more digitally centric as a society. I think we will see more people working from home. We will see more Zoom calls. We have broken that barrier. I think we will see more digital events, etc. But is there something that's very, very different between the two? You know, is there something that we're going to miss, or that is potentially missed, if we move towards a remote first in terms of the service conversation, where that human-to-human interaction between an engineer and a customer, you know, or that human-to-human interaction between an attendee at one of your events and you know, your team or your customers, etc. That face-to-face, is there something that's just going to not quite be there if we move too far forward with digital first?
Yeah. I think if you take a step back, I think it depends what your objective and goal is when you attend a physical conference, because depending on where you're coming from, it's going to be different. If you're a technology vendor or supplier, you're there to talk to customers, you're there to generate leads for your company. That's harder to replicate in a virtual environment. If you're there as within field service, if you're a field service technician or head of service or head of customer care, you're there to learn and to network. So I think, like as with everything, there's good and bad points. I think virtual summits, virtual events, it makes it very accessible to you as a participant, regardless of your location. So you're seeing virtual events now becoming open, right? Becoming borderless. So although we were having field service Asia before, all of a sudden now we've got global service heads from the US that are speaking. We've got global service heads from the UK that are speaking. It would have been very difficult for them before to fly to the event, to factor that in, to week out the office. So that's a great value add. And maybe in the future, we will be using Zoom at the physical event for those global service leaders just to dial in, right? The technology's there. We've shown that. But to answer your question, I think it's very hard to replace the kind of small after hours roundtable talk that you really get at conferences. Often the best value I've ever got from attending an event is not from someone's presentation. It's been from just the back and forth questioning I've got from attending someone's workshop, or discussing over some lunch, or having a beer in the cocktail party afterwards. And so that's enjoyable. But look, the technology's there, right? We'd be foolish not to make the most of it, and we're adapting our business model. So the one thing we're doing is we're not resting on our laurels. We are putting out a number of different channels. So it's not just webinar focused. We're doing one-to-one meetings on Zoom that are pre-organized for customers. We're doing podcasts. I host a podcast now. We're doing very detailed reports, including with yourselves, to make sure that we're at the front of people's minds in terms of market research. So I think you have to have a multi-channel approach. Yeah. And I think in the future, to answer your question, I think people will want more choice. They will want the choice to attend a physical conference, but they will also want the choice to be able to do it in the channel, physical or virtual, of their choice. And I think as brands, we have to be meeting the customers in the channel of their choice.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. I think it's created in the choice for the customer. I suppose one point I specifically looking at this from the service realm and to push back on and to kind of get your thoughts, Anila, on this one. So both Jan and Danny there have kind of looked at this from, as is the way we should, looked at this very much from the customer perspective. As did you initially in the conversation. I'm going to ask you to try and take a slightly different lens here. Of course, it's great to be able to give our customers choice, and it's great for the story that I presented at the beginning. That's great to have our engineer, solving that problem and being visible so that the customer's aware of it. I suppose one thing that a lot of service organizations have always looked at is that, it's been the perennial conversation. How do we leverage the trusted advisor status of our engineers? How do we, of our organization, of our key people? There is an intrinsic kind of value in that conversation. And also when we put somebody on site, especially if they're going in as a problem solver, they become the eyes and ears for our organization. They're able to say, well, do you know what? They're doing this brilliantly. They could there is a solution we have that we're not offering them that we could bring to the table. And maybe and different companies will do this in different ways. They'll have different channels for mediating that conversation. But there is a huge value in having that engineer on site. From us, if we take a less altruistic view and we just say, as an organization, we want our best people on to be in the heart and the belly of the beast for the customer, to be able to see their issues. Is that something that we've got to be careful of as well as we look towards remote and these solutions, of making sure we're not giving away an advantage? Or am I perhaps being a bit too old and cynical, and I've got too many of these grey hairs starting to crop up? I face the camera very well because all my grey hairs are at one size. But am I being a bit cynical there, or is there something that we could lose as organisations when we look at our sales channels and our marketing and all of that approach if we don't have people on site so much?
So look, I think it's the value or the perceived value, right, of our people either on site or working remotely. And I think You know, when there's value, then you defy all odds, right? And I often tell the story of my mum, who's 76 and based out of India. For the last couple of years, she's done all of her ordering online, all of her grocery shopping online, and Amazon works for her. You know, and for someone who didn't grow up in the digital age, you know, to have adapted so well to a service that delivers her food. She's the primary carer for my dad, so she can't leave home. So there's value in it, but the value is enhanced because of the processes that that company adopts in terms of, you know, return goods, for example. Someone picks it up. There's no questions asked. So, you know, she orders things madly for us, even without asking, right? Sometimes she overdoes it. But the reason why she's adapted to that digital technology in the portal is because it serves a purpose. It adds value to her, right? And I tell that story often because sometimes we do it the opposite way. We say, no, it's productivity benefits. We need everyone to move to digital. You know, we want to move everything remote. So we approach it in a very different way, where we've said this suits our organization, so therefore everyone shall follow, right? Or our people need to follow because this is what it is. But if we really focus on the value add to the customer, I mean, so their service isn't working. And you said, Kris, like, would there be value in having an engineer on site who can go and fix it? Yes. But how much more value would there be if we did predictive analysis and fix the problem even before the customer experienced it, right? So whilst we might say that the value is in having someone on site, maybe that's not the answer at all. It's about really maintaining networks proactively, using predictive analysis to ensure that it never goes off air, rather than, you know, and when it does go off air, we've got the necessary people out there in the quickest possible time, and our responsiveness is key, right? So I think it's really challenging the mindsets, you know, the traditional mindsets. And if my mum can do it at 76, you know, why is she doing it? Because it's simple. It's really simple interface. It fulfills the need. And I think that's where we need to get it back, make the complex simple, and go back to the basics about what do our customers need? You know, what are we trying to solve for? And also anticipate, right? If I look at the learnings from, you know, this situation, we had a 3-year roadmap and we consistently worked towards it. We went from 3 IVRs to a single IVR. We moved to a digital portal. We automated the creation of tickets. We, you know, got rid of some outsourced teams that weren't really adding value and brought, you know, automated that stuff and then brought some of the work home. So it all worked. But what's the next curve, right? What's the next, what do we need to anticipate for moving forward? And I think that's the real key. You can't stop. You've got to really look at that value add and, you know, really challenge our mindsets of how we've done work, right? And as technology changes, I think there's amazing stuff that's happening, right? But then, you know, it's also about, you know, who would have thought that through this period, our employee engagement's gone up? You know, like I think I was sharing at our last conversation, you know, participation rates are 93%. Engagement is at above 80%. It's higher than it ever was. NPS is also high. So our customers are happy, you know, happier than they were before this period. And overall, you know, productivity has gone up. Like if you looked at, you know, working from home, it hasn't adversely affected people turning up. They are turning up. In fact, more than they were before. So I think it challenges a lot of that. And sometimes it's our own mindsets, I think. And also, I think for me, being part of operations, it's about having a seat at the table because we know what's happening out in the field. And I think it's very important that we have a voice and we share rather than, you know, it being a top-down, hey, this is what we're going to do this year. It's about really influencing those decisions because I think our people know as well, right, what's required on the ground.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And it's interesting because you talk about the technology, and what I thought it was really interesting because this kind of resonates for me. Now, I have a slight, and I know I'm probably like one person against like 7.5 billion. But I have an issue with the phrase digital transformation because, bear with me on this, because what you've described to me is exactly how I think it should be. We utilize the technology because it fulfills a purpose, and the value isn't in the technology itself; it's in the purpose. And therefore, I see digital transformation as It's just a linguistic thing. It's just a semantics thing. Maybe it's because I spend all day writing that I get bogged down with this stuff. But, you know, transformation says that we go from A to B, whereas I think we should be on a continuous journey. And I've always bought into this idea of like the continuous business journey, continuous improvement journey. And I see it now as the tools that we're utilizing happen to be the digital tools, because we're in the digital age. And so that really shone through. And I always love it when I hear, you know, examples that bring our loved ones into it as well, because it makes it so much more real. And I can actually just your mum sounds very similar to mine in the sense that she's forever ordering stuff for me that I nearly swore then. My apologies.
Kris, I would like to add a perspective to this, also a combination of what Anela just said and you saying. So, you know, I agree. Transformation is never from A to B being an end point. That's just ridiculous to think that. It's a kind of ongoing journey. But improvement is improving what you do. And at some point, you have to do something new, something else, something different, and also then improve that. So some changes are shifting or more radical or doing new things which you haven't done before. And you can call that a transformation, or you can call that something else, but it is another kind of change. And I think one of the challenges today, it was already the case, but that's going to, first of all, be accelerated, but there may be some waves in it. So you have to solve problems of your clients. If you don't solve a problem of the clients, which is a pain point for them, there's no value in what you do, whether you come on site or do it remotely. So that value has to be there. So what is the value? So that could be temporarily different. First of all, your clients want to have their people safe. They want to continue their operations. But maybe from uptime and efficiency and utilization of assets, maybe it's now just pure, how can we reduce costs? Because we are under cash pressure, but that has a different value driver in the kind of service you deliver and how you should deliver it. And then maybe in 2 years, 1 year or 3 years, you don't know, then it might be back to, okay, but now it's back to utilization. So how are you going to, first of all, listen and predict that kind of shift, be on time to adjust the way you offer your service, or maybe start delivering other kind of services? And how are you going to sense the next change in 1 year or 2 years and keep on doing that? And I think that is something a lot of traditional manufacturers are still kind of finding the way how to do that. So that is a culture change they have to go through.
It's interesting because it's that iterative approach. That's what I'm trying to get to as well. I think we're at again, I think it's a semantics, but I think the concept is quite important of this iterative approach. I think, talking about iterative approaches and other things we're approaching the end of the session. But I would like to give Danny the final kind of comment here. And Danny, I think just, I know full well that I can put you on the spot and say, wrap up this entire conversation in 2 minutes and you can do it. But I'm not going to do that for once. I'm going to be quite kind. I'm going to put one last question to you. We've talked about iterative approaches. We've talked about communication shifts. We've talked about having to be close to our customers. We've talked about having to innovate and pivot. We've talked about agility in businesses. This comes right back, and I thought, and then you actually brought this right back at the beginning by saying a lot of what we had to do is very simple. That gave me an echo of what you were saying right at the top. So I just want to turn to you as a leader in your organization, Danny. How has leadership changed in the last 5 months? And, you know, how do you see the leadership role in terms of innovation? And not an in-depth point, because we're right on depth, but just a couple of key bullet points from your personal perspective. And I think that'd be a great point to close.
Yeah, sure. So I don't think the key pillars have changed, and obviously it depends on what your personal view of good leadership is, but I think the key pillars are still the same. Have a clear vision, listen with empathy, be available, don't just say you're available, actually be available and show up. Mentor your high achievers, make sure you mentor them, and that includes millennial leaders and Gen Z that are coming into the workforce. Trust your team to do what they're responsible to do. There's nothing worse than showing up in the virtual environment to try and micromanage and make sure your team are working. You know, check in with me at 10, check in with me at 12. That's not going to deliver any long-term results. And I think the big change now, just to close, I think the big change is for leaders is how can you inspire your team from a remote location? And as I touched on before, just being honest and loving yourself enough to be vulnerable, because we don't have all the answers. Things do change on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. We're not going to have all the information. And just remove your ego. You know, nobody wants to have a leader that has a huge ego. And how do you do that? I think the main thing you do is listen with empathy, but get in the trenches with your team. Anila and I were talking about this at the beginning, is, you know, roll up your sleeves and get into the trenches with your team and do whatever is necessary to get your company through this challenging period. I mean, that for me is effective leadership.
Excellent. Perfect point to close up what was a very, very insightful session. I felt we could have carried on the conversation for a lot longer, guys, to be perfectly honest. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I hope everyone watching has as well. My final point is just to say thank you very much, Jan, Danny, Anila, and everyone watching. My name's Kris Odland. I am the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News. It's been my pleasure to host this conversation, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Anila. Thanks, Jan.
Bye-bye.